May the words of my lips and the meditations of all of our hearts be acceptable in thy sight. O God, our Creator and Redeemer. Amen.
Amen.
I want to start, first of all, by saying thank you to the little team gathered here and to Scott in the distance as he watches us this morning for all of the work that's been going on here over the last, I guess it's 6 weeks or so since we had to shut down the full content of our parish and have been putting our services out on video. And we who have been at home have been so appreciative of all your efforts. And it's been quite wonderful to be a part of it all, even while we're still in our PJs. I also want to mention Canon Paul Brillinger, who was a mentor of mine and who passed last week, as we all heard last Sunday. And may he rest in peace and rise in glory. And I also want to say that in the greater scheme of things, 30 years isn't very long for clergy. Most of my male colleagues of my age and just beyond her, closer to 60, but for a woman it's significant because we weren't allowed to be ordained until well into the late 70s, so I waited till the 80s when my kids were a bit older. We've come a long way since those days in all kinds of ways, and I was thinking back to the battles that we were having in churchland in those days, and we were just getting over the liturgical battles of the books. Book of Common Prayer and the Book of Alternative Services was still something of a bitter pill for some people to swallow. And women were by no means universally accepted when I was ordained. They hadn't even thought about ordaining women in England at that time. So we have changed things rather a lot in those days, and I'm very grateful for the many changes that have happened. But enough about the past. I want to focus today on the somewhat challenging present in which we find ourselves and to think a little about our future. There's a story that goes back probably something like 1700 years that may or may not be apocryphal, but it's good anyway. And it took place when much of the world was unknown, largely unmapped. Cartographers had to have some way of portraying those areas of the earth that were as yet unexplored. So they symbolized these regions by drawing dragons and monsters and large fish. And the message was clear. Uncharted territories were frightening, fearsome places. But there might actually be some treasures buried over there. The story is this. One commander of a battalion of Roman soldiers was caught up in a battle that took him into the territory that the map makers had represented with their monsters and dragons. Not knowing whether to forge ahead into the unknown or to turn back into the known, which would also be a retreat, he dispatched a messenger to Rome with this urgent request. Please send new orders. We have marched off the map. I don't know what the answer was, but I do think that sometimes in these days of COVID-19 and the major disruption of so many of our normal and familiar routines, it feels to many of us that we too are being led off the map. And for church leaders and of my generation, probably more so than for the younger ones who've learned to manage technology so much better than I have, it certainly feels like that a lot more. St. George's has been particularly blessed to have two young clergy leaders who had already worked hard to bring this parish into the 21st century electronically. Our video streamed services were already up and running when COVID-19 shut down our face-to-face meetings in this building. While many others were scurrying to put together their own electronic resources, thanks to Scott and to Martha and our skilled video technologists, we were ahead of the game. But when I talk about having to find our way without a map that works any longer, I'm speaking about far more than simply the technicalities of sharing our services. I'm talking about the opportunities for us as church to rethink how and why we do the things we do, and to do some serious discerning about how things might look when once the isolation order is finally rescinded. And that may still be a few months ahead. What will normal look like when we go back? So I thought that what Jesus says at the end of our gospel passage today might be a great starting point for these meanderings. He said, I came that they may have life and have it abundantly. I came that they may have life and have it abundantly. And as some of us struggle to find life away from our normal routines and social gatherings, the family visits, the eating out, the shopping, the concerts, the movies, the volunteering, even getting our hair cut. In fact, whatever it may be that we're missing, we turn to Jesus and ask him what he can suggest that might help to compensate for all these losses. And what I see happening in my life, and I'm sure that some of you do too, is that now we are so much less busy than usual, we have an opportunity to reflect on which direction we should like to see our lives and our world leading once all of this social distance is over. For many months now, I have been very much aware that far beyond all of the coronavirus fears and the inconveniences, probably the most pressing and urgent challenge that we as a world have is to tackle the fragile state of our planet. We're all dependent on it for our lives, and yet it seems that so many leaders and so many of us don't get it or choose not to do so. When Jesus talks about bringing abundant life to his flock, he isn't talking about handsome bank balances or wonderful businesses or the perfect wardrobe or magnificent vacations. He's talking about life in the broadest sense of that word. And none of us can possibly experience life in all of its abundance unless our natural world is healthy, because humanity is entirely dependent on the air, water, and soil of our planet for its very existence. Perhaps this COVID-19 pause will give all of us the chance to really listen to the groans of our planet and to hear the wisdom and warnings from our indigenous peoples wherever they live on this earth. And it would seem to be our sacred duty to work to ensure that this planet is a safe, life-supporting place for the generations to come. In his Good Shepherd passage, Jesus also talks about the sheep hearing his voice and knowing it. And one of the tasks, perhaps the greatest task of the church always, is to help people to hear the voice of the shepherd and to respond. Where have we been doing that well, and where are the gaps? How could we better allow people to find Jesus and to hear him in all of their busyness? Canon Dawn Davis's Revive program is a marvelous example of an attempt to reach people in this intimate manner. Could we possibly expand access to that rich resource so that more of us sheep can benefit and learn from it? Our experiences with electronic access for many who might never enter our church buildings should also encourage us to expand that kind of ministry opportunity. I hear of so many wonderfully creative online offerings across our parishes. What about more opportunities to train people who might be less sure of themselves in the video streaming department? And there's certainly a great opportunity to reach the younger generation, especially when we as a church start to take the crisis of the planet seriously, so that we work with them to get their voices heard. Martha has begun this conversation in response to Cecilia's concerns, but Cecilia is far from alone in her pleas for our world. We certainly need to listen to their voices if there is to be a future for humanity on this planet. I could go on, but I don't want to spend too much time looking forward, because I know that so many of us are in need of some hopeful and immediate sustenance to boost our faith and our spirits during this strange pause in our normal routines. So now I'm going to turn back to Psalm 23, which on this Good Shepherd Sunday always provides joy and reassurance. There's probably no better known piece of scripture than this psalm. Many of you can likely recite it by heart or sing it in the way that we just did. I certainly always find people praying it with me when I pray it in a hospital or a home setting. It's a psalm which expresses a childlike faith in God's ability to protect us, just as a shepherd protects his sheep or her sheep. He makes me lie down in green pastures. He leads me beside still waters. What could be more idyllic? The shepherd finds just the right, safe spot for the sheep to be refreshed. But this psalm, this old friend, also speaks about the darker moments of life. Yea, though I walk through the valley of death, I shall fear no evil, for thy rod and staff guide me. It's a hymn, it seems, for young and optimistic lives, as well as for those of us who are older and moving towards the end of life. It's a psalm that may be used on almost any occasion, but it's especially associated with funerals. And I will dwell in the house of the Lord forever, says verse 6. And whenever we've been tossed and turned on wild waters, as we are now, or found ourselves in an arid desert of despair during our lives, it has been to this psalm that we have turned. When we've wandered without meaning or direction, it's been to this psalm that we've turned for comfort, just as we do today. When life makes us wonder if God is really there, if God really cares, it's Psalm 23 that puts comforting arms around us and reassures us of a God who makes, leads, restores, comforts, prepares, and anoints, so that in darkness or light, life or death, we might dwell with God. Surely goodness and mercy shall follow me all the days of my life, is how we have learned the ending of that psalm in English. But if we take a look at the original Hebrew words of that sentence, we find some new and astonishing depth of meaning. The word translated goodness is the Hebrew word hesed. It's often translated steadfast love. And the word here translated mercy is the one also used in Hebrew for kindness or fidelity. So it seems to be saying that even when we are not faithful, God remains so, and his goodness and love follow us. But the most astonishing word is the one that we have generally translated as follow. Goodness and mercy shall follow me. The Hebrew meaning of that word can also be translated as pursue. If we think of it like that, we find that goodness and mercy pursue me. And if goodness and mercy are pursuing us and not merely following us, what does that mean for our lives? There's a big difference between being followed and being pursued. Jesus told a story about a shepherd who spent hours looking for one lost sheep, and he wasn't content until he'd found it. That's pursuing. He told other stories too about how we humans pursue something that's lost, and reminded his audience that God is like that with us. And then, of course, there's the story of the prodigal son and the warm welcome his father gave him upon his return home, despite all of his excesses. It seems that God is not only behind us, if we only turn round to see, but he's also actively trying to get our attention. So today, as we go about our restricted routines, quarantined and isolated in so many ways, try to find a quiet moment to reflect on this little psalm prayer and give thanks for the wonderful truth that our God is one who not only beckons us, but who also pursues us to share with us goodness, mercy, care, and love. Amen.